for being here. If I could, I'm going to start the questions here before we take some questions from the audience with just a little bit of a different approach. We'll talk about transportation. We'll talk about workforce, Tom, workforce development. We'll certainly talk about MNsure. We'll talk about a number of programs. But, you know, I'm so many people, many in this group, many of my students in this audience have said that over the past years, politics has gotten more partisan. It's gotten harder. It's gotten harsher. It doesn't have the civility that it used to have in the good old days. And by the way, the good old days were never as good as we think they were. But could you just refer both of you just to one thing that you're going to do this session to reach out to the other side, to either the minority Democrats, Kurt, or the minority Republicans, Tom, maybe to each other. Are you going to name a Democrat, Kurt, to be a vice chair of a committee? Can you have joint committees on the sex offender program together? Just give me one thing, one hope that if that perception is true about civility, we're going to return to that a little bit. Speaker, just give me one little nugget.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us here, and thank you to all of you in the audience today for coming out and listening to us. We're excited to get started and really get to work for Minnesotans here. So thank you for coming and joining us today. I think that, and thank you, Speaker Sviggum, for the question. I think that I actually have a really good reputation. Since I came in as minority leader 2 years ago, of really trying to change the tone, at least on the House side. I'm really proud of the way the last two nights of session ended the last 2 years. And I have really worked hard to have a great working relationship with both Speaker Thiessen and with Majority Leader Bakk. And I want to continue that. As far as one thing that we're going to do, I'm going to try to do everything I can to make sure that the minority is included and has a voice and doesn't get drowned out, and that we're moving along without taking their opinion into account. I think I've said very often that I'm not going to have the best idea or every idea. And what I think a good leader does is inspires and draws the best ideas out of each member, regardless of which side of the aisle those ideas come from. I want to make sure that we're doing the work we need to for Minnesotans, and talking about those best ideas and then implementing the best ones into law. So I hope that I'm doing everything I can to make sure that we're drawing those best ideas out.
Majority Leader Bakk?
Well, I have two thoughts. First, thank all of you that are here with us today, and thank you to all the people that are listening in today. The work we do at the Capitol and state governments is important to the quality of our life in Minnesota, and the decisions that we make there are very, very important. So thanks for being interested enough to be here and to listen in. I'm going to start in about an hour. The Speaker and I are planning on having lunch together. With our chiefs of staff.
Don't tell anybody though.
And we're not going to go so far as to tell you where we're going. But I think that's important. I actually reached out to him yesterday, indicated we were going to unveil the Senate's early bills. I actually have the House jackets to those bills that the Senate introduced. I told the Speaker yesterday that I would share them with him, and if he wants to sign them, if he thinks some of them are good ideas, and he's got some members that he thinks would be very good at carrying the flag on some initiatives that the Senate thinks are important, I think having the strongest author in the House is a better decision for him to make than for me to make. So I think some of those ideas are things that the Republicans in the Senate and in the House are going to be interested in. So we're going to try work bipartisanly right away with the initial bill introductions, so that we start to work at the onset at least on things that we agree on that are going to be priorities that we share going forward.
Thank you to both of you. That's wonderful. All of us have things we can agree upon. That's a base, and we can build from there. Mr. James?
One of the very clear themes that's already emerging from this session is that there is going to be an attention to Greater Minnesota and a focus. Could you talk a little bit about some of the common ground that might exist in terms of what the legislature and state government can do for the pockets of our state that are still struggling or have not recovered from the Great Recession and may even be losing population. Speaker Daudt?
Sure. I think this is kind of it shouldn't be a new thought, but I think it's become, because of the results of ours in the last election, I think folks realize we made some really big gains in greater Minnesota, and we were out talking to voters during the election cycle about the fact that we had felt a little bit that greater Minnesota got left behind in the last couple of years, and I'm not even implying that was intentional, but we feel that maybe the leadership, at least on the House side, didn't completely understand that some of these issues impact greater Minnesota differently than they do the metro area. So obviously we want to make sure, and we've made that commitment since the election, that we want all of Minnesota to feel like it's well represented, and we need to take into account the viewpoints of our legislators from greater Minnesota who are going to understand those issues a lot more deeply. As far as addressing areas that I think we agree on, I have also been very open in saying I get frustrated with the way the process works in St. Paul. And what I mean by that is on the very first day of session, you get legislators that show up and introduce their solutions in bill format, and then they spend the next 5 months trying to convince you that that solution is the answer to your problem. And to me, that's backwards. I feel like we need to really start with the problem and work towards the solution. And one of those problems in greater Minnesota is really matching up the workforce with the jobs. And very often, and maybe I shouldn't say this here in a four-year institution, but very often students are going into four-year institutions when we really need folks in voc tech programs, and especially in greater Minnesota for welding and manufacturing and some of those sorts of jobs. So I think and I'll let Senator Bakk he can speak on this as well. But I think this is an area where we can find agreement between the House and the Senate, and I look forward to kind of working on those issues.
Tom, I think you're going to have a lot in common, because I heard you on the radio this morning use the word welding. Welders. I think you saw signs on the way down. You see. Can you respond to it?
Well, it's become pretty obvious that we have a skills gap in our state. When you look at our unemployment rate, interestingly enough, there are about the same number of people unemployed as businesses have in vacancies that they can't fill. So I think the challenge going forward is figuring out how can, in a tighter and tighter labor market, how can we make sure that the people that are unemployed or the new graduates from high school have the kind of skill set to fill the vacancies that we already know that employers have. And that is one of the things that the Senate led with this morning. And I thought what was kind of interesting about it was, even though the Speaker and I didn't share what our priorities were going to be for our early bill introductions, so we did it in a vacuum from each other, much like how a governor puts a budget together without talking to the legislature. It's interesting, as you look down the list, there are some similarities. And one of them is workforce development. I think it's absolutely critical, especially in rural Minnesota. And we led with something pretty bold, a little bit bolder than what the House proposed, but they're running, I think, parallel to us. We led with making vocational and technical education in Minnesota free. We think there needs to be a stronger path from high school into vocational training where a lot of the jobs are. And I told a story this morning. My dad passed away a year ago. My dad was one of the great generations that served in World War II, and when he came home, he went to Dunwoody for carpentry. So I grew up with carpentry in my family. And I can remember at a very young age him telling me, even though there was no question I was going to go off to college, but I can remember at a very young age him telling me, if you learn how to do something with your hands, you will never be hungry. And I think we have lost sight of that as parents, as educational institutions, and we have pushed more and more people into four-year higher education, and then in many, many cases, in way too many cases, a parent's worst nightmare comes true. They come home with a bachelor's degree, college loans, and no job. And they move into, and you like to think you've reconverted the bedroom, and they end up back at home. And that is a nightmare for way too many families. So to the extent, and to kind of parallel along with that, and one thing we didn't talk about today is one of the places we have to make some improvements if we're going to deliver the skill set that our business community needs is in the area of career counseling for kids in high school, in 11th and 12th grade. You know, we are like 49th in the country in our ratio of high school counselors to pupils. I mean, like, Mississippi is better than we are. And that's intentional. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because we have been driving all of the money to the classroom and all of the money to lower class sizes and have left all those support type services on the back burner, including all of the other programming like industrial education have fallen by the wayside because what superintendent, what principal wants to have an underperforming school, and we test for certain subject areas. So that's where we've pushed all the revenues to the areas we test, and I think we took a swing and a miss in a lot of the places in Minnesota. So we're hoping to refocus some of the emphasis, start helping high school juniors and seniors at an earlier time think about career planning, and potentially, vocational education in this state used to be free. The Senate's not reinventing the wheel here. They're good, honorable occupations that will support a family, and in more and more of those career fields, we have workforce shortages.
Speaker Daudt.